President Cyril Ramaphosa has announced a raft of measures to try and contain the spread of the coronavirus in South Africa, including a national state of disaster. He says this will help in combating the spread of the virus. The announcement follows an urgent cabinet meeting to discuss measures to combat the spread of the coronavirus in South Africa. Ramaphosa says 61 cases of the virus have now been confirmed in South Africa, and most of these are people who had travelled overseas. Ramaphosa says South Africa has never ever faced such a challenge in the democratic era.
To limit contact between persons who may be infected and South African citizens, we're imposing a travel ban on foreign nationals from high-risk countries such as Italy, Iran, South Korea, Spain, Germany, the United States, the United Kingdom, and China as from 18th March 2020. We have cancelled visas to visitors from those countries from today, and previously granted visas are hereby revoked. South African citizens are advised to refrain from all forms of travel to or through the European Union, the United States, United Kingdom, and other identified high-risk countries such as China, Iran, and South Korea. This is effective immediately.
Meanwhile, President Ramaphosa says government will strengthen the surveillance, the screening and testing measures at all international airports. And of the 53 land ports, 35 will be shut down from tomorrow. 2 of the country's seaports will also be closed for passengers and crew changes.
Any foreign national who has visited high-risk countries in the past 20 days will be denied a visa. South African citizens returning from high-risk countries will be subjected to testing and self-isolation or quarantine on return to South Africa. Travelers from medium-risk countries such as Portugal, Hong Kong, and Singapore will be required to undergo high-intensity screening. All travelers who have entered South Africa from high-risk countries since mid-February will be required to present themselves for testing.
For more on South Africa's approach to coronavirus, we are joined in studio by Professor Raymond Parsons, economist from the Northwest University's Business School. Professor, very good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
Good evening to you.
Are you at all impressed with government's approach to coronavirus?
I think we've got to understand that we're in an extraordinary situation requiring extraordinary measures, whether you think globally or in South Africa. And I think what we saw tonight was real leadership from the president. We're getting ahead of the curve, given the magnitude of what we are facing. And quite clearly, drastic action is needed, and one would rather be safe than sorry in the measures that one takes. So I think from the point of view, from the broad point of view of what we need to do in South Africa, these are necessary steps we have to take. I would also say, though, at the outset, that although we'll talk later a little about some of the specific steps, there's a golden thread that runs through all this for those who are worried about their jobs or worried about the future of their business, especially small business. The golden thread is that we must stay calm, we must be prepared and prudent about what we need to do, and we need to respect medical science. I think those are the 3 pillars on which we need to rest our addressing of the drastic actions that we now need to take, because the South Africa of tomorrow is going to wake up to a very different scenario.
Yeah. Do you think these drastic measures come a little too late? I mean, why did South Africa have to wait until the death toll reached 61? For instance, in Kenya's got one of the lowest infection rates on the continent. I think it stands at 4. But then already they've imposed drastic measures, calling for the shutting down of schools.
Well, I think it's important that you assess the evidence and you decide when you want to act. Quite clearly, there are interests involved. you don't want to reach a situation where you take situations that have unintended consequences. So you also want to test some of the options. So I don't think that there's been a very great delay. I think today we saw that we are going to get the head of the curve. We're all in the same boat. I think that's the basic message. We're all in the same boat. As the President said, we have a common threat and we need to unite. Yes, there are going to be difficulties, make no mistake about it. There is a trade-off between what you take on the medical side and its impact on the economy. That, as he indicated, that's inevitable. But there are other steps that are being taken, and so we need to look at the total package. In other words, both those health steps that both the government and each one of us need to take in order to control the outbreak on the one hand, and on the other hand, to say there will be economic consequences, and there the government will work on a package, hopefully together with both business and labour, to see that we get the best package. And I would also say there, in some instances, already in the last budget, there were proposals for small business and other incentives. Maybe we need smart tape rather than red tape in expediting what we've already decided to assist business in various other ways. So we need a coordinated and a coherent approach, and I think that comes through very clearly in what the President said.
And the fact that the gatherings of more than 100 people are now being prohibited. And I suppose that this is an implication of a partial shutdown of the economy, looking at the fact that the manufacturing sector sees, over 100 employees working up the entire workforce.
I think we've got to be very clear. And I think the President made it clear. And I think we all know that there is an economic price to be paid for whatever health steps you take. There's no doubt there is a trade-off. And that's why it's important that, for example, I don't think it was mentioned in the President's speech, but it was indicated elsewhere today that NEDLAC will be having a special meeting tomorrow, and that represents government, labour, business and the community, to look at what is being done, to look at what the President has said, and then to begin to see how can we best implement it, bearing in mind that every one of those stakeholders has to bring something to the party. It's really a question now of how is the pain of dealing with the COVID-19 to be spread over different stakeholders. And I think that's where, in fact, the consultation is important. And I did suggest a few days ago that there ought to be some kind of war council to address this issue. And I see that the President has decided there will be a command council, which will meet 2 or 3 times a week, so that you will get a constant monitoring of the situation, a constant feedback, and above all, to inform the country as to are we succeeding, where are we failing, and how much more cooperation we need. Because unless there's collaboration, I come back to the point of the cliche, we're all in the same boat. Yeah. And that message comes through so clearly from what the President said, but we need to now practically implement what has been decided and see how it can be tweaked or refined in terms of the realities that one might then indicate as the situation unfolds over the next few months.
Professor, you mentioned that South Africa has, this is a huge price to pay for South Africa. Can South Africa afford to pay the price, not at the expense of lives?
I think the question has to be, can we afford not to address the COVID-19 in a drastic way? Because the costs of not addressing it will be very high. And we've got to accept that we need to understand that our economy is dependent on good health, but health in turn is dependent on the economy. So that's why it has to be a multi-pronged approach. And that is what came through in what the President said. He said there's an immediate and present danger in terms of the health challenge, but we want to deal with it in such a way that we can minimize the economic price. But the inevitable economic price at a time when the South African economy is rather more vulnerable than it was a few years ago. I like to use the analogy, remember that with the Great Recession of 2008, it was called a black swan because it was unexpected, unpredictable, and had serious consequences. Well, within 12 years, we have another black swan, and it's called COVID-19, and we have to deal with it. And I think we need to develop unusual strategies that we can deal with, and we need to, above all, mobilize the country as a whole. And I think that's a very important message. It's not someone else's problem down the passage. It's a problem that we all have to cooperate in order to solve, whether in business, labor, government, the community. I think it calls for us to help to implement what has to be done, and above all, to do it in such a way, as the President said, that we change our behavior to make the solutions workable and to get through this phase. We will get through it, but it's going to take time. But how we deal with it will make a big difference to how long it lasts, what its impact is, what the ultimate consequences will be. I would say from a business point of view, every business person waking up tomorrow must certainly revisit their plans and decide how they're going to adjust to a different South Africa that's now having to deal with the COVID-19 challenge. And I think that's tremendously important for all of us.
And the change of behavior, I suppose, entails taking this coronavirus very seriously. And, the past few weeks, most South Africans did not take this coronavirus issue as seriously as they should have. There are so many jokes and memes going around on social media. But then do you get the sense that now South Africans are fully cognizant of the full impact of COVID-19?
I think after today, we will be seeing today as a defining moment in how we deal with this crisis. And I think the important point also is that faced with a common threat to health and to the economy, we'll also see that there will be also cooperation between, of course, business and labor, because the workplace is going to be affected. The workplace will be affected, and there will have to be new thinking outside the box of how we deal with this over the next few months. So I think it's also important from the point of view of the cooperation and the dialogue between employers and employees. How do they best implement what has been decided, and how do we make it work? Once again, there could be solutions, for example, on the technology side. Some people can work from home, of course. You can have video conferences. So everything doesn't have to come to a standstill. I think we've got to understand there is a trade-off here. If you really wanted to stop the virus, you must stop everything. Well, we can't stop everything. So there are some core issues, core activities that must go ahead, but within safeguards. And above all, we want to get past this particular phase with the minimum of costs to our economy if we can. But we've got to face up to the realities, and I think that's what the President was saying today. He said, look, we're going to have to take some tough decisions. We're going to have to implement these decisions, but not the government, not labor, not business, but only the country as a whole on this issue is going to make a difference. And the call to cooperation and collaboration, I think, must reach every one of us today, so that tomorrow we act differently and make sure that we get a difference and a different outcome in the face of this very serious crisis.
Now, Professor, just before I let you go, we don't have much time, unfortunately. No doubt that the President's and his team's drastic measures have been warmly received by all sectors concerned. And the fact that, he pulled the plug on some of the country's land and the seaports. But then there are questions, as you mentioned earlier on, that everything does not have to come to a standstill. But then with the South African citrus sector wanting to know how the government will solve the chaos at the country's ports, there's perishable goods that were earmarked for exportation.
Well, those are exactly the kind of things that I think must be raised tomorrow at the NEDLAC meeting, where business will be represented as well as labor. That's very important. And also, I think perhaps that the command center, I understood from today, it seemed very much a government-driven center. Sure. Perhaps there should be representatives from say NEDLAC to help bring input as to what's happening out there, to inform the decisions of the command center. But the basic bottom line is that given what has been decided today, it is now up to the stakeholders in the country, such as at NEDLAC, who have a wonderful opportunity to say, this is how it could work, or there's another way to do it. And I think quite clearly, some of the measures will be refined as we go along. Mm-hmm. Some of the bottlenecks will have to be dealt with. But I would say to all business people, and indeed also our workforce, that when they wake up tomorrow, they have to look at South Africa through very different eyes. And we're going to have to find the outcomes that will get us through this particular situation.
Right.
And I think we have the skills and the know-how. As the President said, we've just got to cooperate in such a way as to get the outcomes that are going to make a big difference to South Africa over the next few months.
All right, Professor, we appreciate your time, and you know what to do. No contact, no physical contact at all. Wash your hands, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Bye.
Well, that was Professor Raymond Parsons, economist from the Northwest University's Business School, just giving us a reaction to the government's drastic measures that will be imposed in fighting the coronavirus scourge. This is the Globe on SABC News. We'll take a quick break.